All right, good morning. Ron Kramer here at the Kramer Law Group. We're here with the Utah Law Talk, and this is our maiden show. And it was a few years ago that I had a blog called the Utah Law Talk, and usually on my blog I would look through KSL.com and find articles that were interesting that talked about personal injury, since that's what we practice at the Kramer Law Group. And I would do stories on it, and I would sort of reword the story, summarize it, and give my take on what I thought the issues were in the story. And sometimes I'd pose questions. You know, in this case, I feel like this needs to be looked at, and there's a question here, and they should consider this. And you know, if I were working on this case, I would recommend this and this and this kind of thing. And so over the years, I sort of stopped doing that, and I'm now, I think we're going to do that again with this radio show, and the site is back, and so this is the radio version of Utah Law Talk. And so I think I'll be doing sort of the same thing I was doing with that blog, which is to talk about topics, personal injury topics, talk about some of the news stories and how it relates to what I do. And it doesn't all have to be personal injury related. Certainly we'll take a stab at other issues, legal issues that I could talk about as an attorney, happening in the community, happening nationally, maybe worldwide, give my take and my spin and my opinion on those things. And like all things, don't take, if I say something, don't take my word for it. If it's a legal kind of piece of advice, you want to consult with your own attorney and make sure you get get a consultation before you act on that. And so basically nothing I say is to be relied on. You've heard that before. A lot of this is just my opinion. So, getting ready for today's show, this afternoon I was, actually it's the morning now. This is being rebroadcast, so you're probably not thinking I'm in the studio at 5:30 in the morning. I'm not. But maybe you're supposed to think that. I don't know. But it is the afternoon, and maybe the producer will tell me later on I shouldn't say that. But in looking at the news today, I saw a story that I thought might be interesting, and it was a story in yesterday's news on KSL about a situation in Park City where there was a criminal trial going on, and like all trials, criminal or civil, the judge or the clerks for the judge will send out subpoenas, and what they're looking for are jurors. And so they issue these subpoenas for the prospective jurors to come in to see if they should sit on that case. And so that happened in Park City. It looks like it happened on December 12th of last year. And this is a criminal trial. Someone is being accused of some sex crime against an underage child, pretty serious allegations. And, a lot of people, especially for criminal trial, that kind of stuff turns their stomach, and they'll tell the judge, I can't be a fair juror on this case. And, I'm never going to be able to be fair because I have kids. I can't imagine if that happened to my kids. And so you need a lot of jurors to go through, because you're going to have to toss a lot of jurors in that kind of case. Sometimes in cases where a defendant might be well known, you might have to toss a lot of those people. And so this was a case that required a lot of jurors, actually, I think, to seat a somewhat fair jury. And apparently 29 of those jurors did not show up. And what's a judge supposed to do? Actually, I misspoke. 36 jurors did not show up that morning for jury duty. And the judge declared a mistrial. He says, we don't have enough judges here to have a jury. And so they sent everyone home. Even the people that came, they were not able to serve because they just didn't have a big enough pool to do that. So flash forward a couple months, and those people that were supposed to come, well, they're supposed to come again, but for a different reason. The reason why they're coming this time is to explain why they didn't show up the first time. And looking at the article, a lot of people were nervous and they didn't know what to expect. And And apparently some of the people didn't get all the materials. They were supposed to get a yellow card, and a number of people say they never got the yellow card, and that was their reason. And they gave other reasons as well. People were saying that they were sick, that babysitter issues, they were confused, didn't know what to do, they were going to be out of town. Some people said, I just didn't do it, my bad. And so the judge got to hear a bunch of different excuses from these prospective jurors that should have been there for jury duty. And the judge overall, this is Judge Kent Holmberg in 3rd District Court, just down the street here, heard their stories and tried to figure out if these were legit excuses or not, because when you have a jury trial, you need jurors. And it sort of compromises the justice system when the potential jurors don't show up. It creates a lot of problems. And we saw the extreme example here where you got to dismiss the case. Now the defendants in this case probably didn't mind. That's they're everyone's presumed innocent, of course, but sometimes delaying is a good thing for many people who might otherwise be convicted at some point. So the trial still has not happened, and these people came in and provided their excuses, and the judge apparently found at least 10 of them, 10 of the excuses to be no good, and so he gave 10 of these people community service. It says that he ordered community service for 10 of these people, 8 hours of community service for not following the jury's instructions. And apparently they were talking about the instructions in the lobby, and they were comparing notes, and they're saying, yeah, we didn't get this and get that. And the judge found, or at least felt, that everything had been mailed out, that was supposed to have been mailed out. And he says there was no mistake on our end, the mistake was in your end. So I don't know how anyone can appeal that, but it did result in 10 people getting some community service. And so I thought this might be a good segue to talk about what happens when you're called for jury service, right? Having done a number of trials, jury trials, I can speak to that a little bit. And so as an attorney, when we have a jury trial, we will get a list of names, sometimes in advance, sometimes the day of, and it's just there, and we see the names for the first time on that first day of trial. But what you're supposed to do is you show up. You park your car. Usually they'll say, you'll identify to the parking attendant, I'm a juror. They'll tell you where you park. You park in a special place. You get a parking pass. You will be asked to wait in a certain area. And at the right point, they bring you into the courtroom. And they give everyone a number, a name tag, and everyone sort of sits down in a very organized way. And there's a bailiff in that courtroom. There's the judge's clerk who helps get everything put together. And everyone sort of sits down in order. And then they give the attorneys, it could be criminal defense attorneys, could be plaintiff civil attorneys, and it could be attorneys for other types of cases. And everyone gets a list of those jurors' names. And then everyone identifies themselves, and they check to make sure everyone's there and everyone's accounted for. And the judge has people stand up, and depending on the judge, all judges are different. A judge might say, okay, I want you to maybe they'll write on the board. Okay, I want you to give us your first name or your first and last name, where you live, what you do for a living, are you married, do you have kids, where do you work, what magazines do you read, what newspapers do you read, what websites do you read, just some basic background questions, what educational status, where they went to school, what their degree was, that kind of thing. And everyone goes through that. And so for a civil trial, which I'm most familiar with, there could be 40 to 50 people in that room, and everyone sort of gives their background information. And usually that's not enough for the attorneys to make a decision as to whether they want to keep that juror. So jury selection really should be called jury deselection, because that's what attorneys do, is they deselect the jurors the potential jurors that come to them. And it could be that if you're a juror, you get a questionnaire. And that's what we like to do in civil trials. I know a number of attorneys do the same thing. They pass out a questionnaire. And so the first part of you being in that room could be filling out this questionnaire, which asks for that demographic information and other interesting questions. And depending on how you answer those questions, there could be other questions in the judge's chambers. And the judge will almost always have their own questions. And so after the preliminary questions are asked, the judge will usually ask the questions. Now, Utah is a state which hasn't really embraced the concept of attorney-conducted voir dire. And voir dire is jury selection. That's what it is. It's a fancy, I don't know if it's French or what it is. Some people pronounce it voir dire. It's basically jury selection. And, as a plaintiff's attorney, I would prefer to be able to ask all the questions myself. But the judge will typically ask the questions, and sometimes they will let us ask a few questions. The judge usually controls all that part of it. What will happen is the attorneys will have in mind certain questions that flag a concern that they might have. It could be a question on, in a personal injury case, most people agree that, if they can prove their case, that they should get money for their medical bills. But not everyone feels like there should be money for pain and suffering. And some jurors will say, yeah, I agree with that. I think the medical bills should be paid. I just am opposed to pain and suffering money. And so, we might develop a question that would flag someone like that because for me, being a plaintiff's attorney, that's a concern because, when you go to trial, the two basic types of damages are economic damages, things that you can add up, bills and things like that, and more touchy-feely kind of thing, usually called pain and suffering or non-economic damages. And this could include things like mental anguish, inconvenience, stress, anxiety, those types of things. And, when we have jurors on our juries, we want the jurors to be open to those types of damages. And so for someone to say that they couldn't do that, that would be a concern for us. So how it usually works is the judge says, okay, everyone, or for those people that answered yes to that question, I can't award money for what they call non-economic damages, pain and suffering. Usually the judge will take that person back into their chambers, which is their office basically, and the attorneys would go in, the judge would go in, and that prospective juror would go in as well, and everything's recorded, everything's on the record, and at that point the judge says, okay, well, you can ask them some questions. And to me, that's where the real attorney-conducted voir dire starts. Because you could ask those questions. You can ask the follow-up questions, and you can explore how they're feeling. What you're missing in that setting, though, is the crosstalk. I mean, sometimes it's useful if this was an open courtroom to say, okay, well, Mary, or you say, Miss Jones, I see that you are hesitant to allow money for non-economic damages, what we call pain and suffering damages. And then we might say, who else feels the same as Miss Jones? And see who else feels that way. And so it's a way to really save time because, 5 other people can lift their hands up and then you can say, well, or Mr. Smith, you feel the same way, and you can get that confirmation. And I think it goes a little smoother that way. And at any rate, as attorneys, we're after jurors, as these attorneys in this case were, they're after jurors who are going to be fair. And so I would imagine in a criminal context, you want to flag people who just could never be fair under any circumstances. And really that's what jury selection or deselection is all about, is removing jurors who the attorneys feel could not be fair. And so when you have the jury selection process, you should know that if you come in and you're juror number 50, you probably will not be in that juror. jury, because the little secret is that the people closest to number one will probably be much more likely to be on that jury than someone who's at the very end of things. Just because we move in order, in a civil trial, there's 8 jurors in state court, and sometimes there's an alternate, so sometimes 9 are required. And so we bring, the pool comes in, and we're really trying to find who in the first 9 would be suitable. And in Utah state courts, we have what's called a for-cause challenge. And so if someone comes in and says, there's no way I could be, I can't be biased in a case where someone's accused of raping a 9-year-old, and that person would be removed for cause. And so the judge would say, yeah, I agree that that person cannot be fair in this case. That person will not serve on this jury. And then they're excused. The harder question is where they say, well, yeah, it sounds distasteful what happens, but I think I could be fair. And the judge keeps that person on. And, the criminal defense attorney is like, no way, they can't be fair. They need to go. And so the attorney has what's called a peremptory challenge. They have 3 or 4 of those that they can exercise. And they can say, well, that person, I just don't think they can be fair. They need to go. The judge won't excuse you for cause, so I need to use my peremptory challenge, and you need to go. So that's what's going on during jury selection. And at the end of the day, the attorneys try to get rid of all the jurors they can for cause by showing that they have some sort of bias, maybe against people that bring personal injury cases, against people that have been accused of crimes, and try to get them removed for cause. And if that doesn't work, then they use up their challenges. And at the end of the day, there are 8 to 9 people left. And that's the jury. And everyone else is who's there, who showed up, they are excused. And they get credit for being there. They showed up, they did their civic duty, they came, and they were honest about their feelings, and they didn't make the cut. And that's fine. Not everyone is suitable to serve on a jury. And they went home, and they went on, continued with their life. So that's sort of what happens in a jury trial in terms of jury selection. And, there's a big difference between criminal and civil. And criminal, of course, is somebody who's been accused of a crime. And civil cases are a lot of those are personal injury cases. It could be a contract dispute. That's a civil case. Even a small claims case is a civil case. But if you're called for jury duty, it's not going to be for small claims usually. It's going to be for something a little more weighty. And for the most part, having practiced for over 20 years, for the most part, the cases that you hear at trial, these are legit cases. And there's legitimate disputes sometimes as to whether someone did something wrong, as to whether there's an injury. And so the civil justice system needs people to help decide these matters, because the reality is that if you are a juror, you are there because, especially in a civil case, you are there because the case could not be resolved. And so they needed a fact finder to come in and decide this case. And what they try to do is to try to bring people in from different parts of the community. It's a community group decision on this. And so, if the case happens in Salt Lake, they're not wanting to bring people in just from the avenues or from, West Valley or Draper. They try to get a broader collection of people from within that county to serve as jurors, because then they have a voice that more reflects the demographics of the community. And that's what we're after. We're looking for you've heard of a jury of your peers. That's really what we're shooting for in that situation, is a jury of their peers. And, hopefully someone that jury represents them a little more closely demographically, and can relate to them and understand them, and can help maybe explain, hey, you don't understand. And they have a chance to have a voice in that jury deliberation room about the issues they heard in that case. And so a jury by the people is a very powerful thing. Very few countries have, actually, we're the only country that has a jury by the people like we have in the U.S. And It's a very unique concept, and it allows the community to speak as one. And it's interesting. Last night we do a number of focus groups, and we did one particular focus group where, at the end, we took a straw tally and we said, okay, we want you to tell us what you think about this case, and they told us, and then we said, now we want you to deliberate together, talk together amongst yourselves, and figure out what should be the proper decision in this case, what should be the proper verdict in this case. And they did, and the results were a lot different than what they were as individuals. And together they came together, and they actually, in this case, as a personal injury case, they actually put more fault on the defendant than they did individually. And they just came together, and I peeked in there and I saw them deliberate, talking amongst themselves and voicing their opinions. And it's such a dynamic process, and you just don't get that anywhere else but in the United States. So I'm going to end pretty soon on this topic, but if you're called to jury duty, go, okay? If something's come up in your life, then call into the court. Let them know, I have this issue, I'm sick, I am out of state, I have health issues, whatever it is, let them know. And they will probably excuse you. It says, at least in this story, that a few people called in and they gave their excuses to the clerk, and based on that, they were excused from having to come in. So the best thing to do is to, if you have an excuse, call in. If you don't, show up, and then you can explain yourself. And we see that a lot in jury selection. They come in and say, you know what, I don't have a babysitter. My mom's watching my kids. I'm supposed to be at work right now. This is super inconvenient. And they tell the judge all this. And the judge makes a decision along with the attorneys. The attorneys are sometimes asked to weigh in. And the decision is made as to whether they should be excused. But the thing about this story that caught my eye is that something is done about this. And if nothing was done, that's a danger to the community, because people would think it's okay not to show up, right? These people that didn't show up, they didn't go, nothing happened to them. So if I'm called for jury duty, I don't have to show up either. No big deal. But this case showed that it is a big deal. You got to show up. As a citizen, it's your responsibility, it's your duty, and you are a big help to the attorneys, to the judge in the case, in rendering justice. All right, so you've been called in to take part in a civil jury trial, not a criminal jury trial, but a civil jury trial. And you're wondering, why are we here? And you're wondering what the case is about, and you're there sitting in the courtroom, and you're wondering, couldn't they have settled this case? Why did they have to take me from my day? I have my kids I'm watching, I'm working, I'm a student in school, I got these other things I'm doing. This is a real inconvenience. And so the reality is, if you are called to serve as a juror in a personal injury matter, and I'll speak to that because that's my area of specialty, it's probably because the case could not be worked out. And at some point, I'm sure there was some discussions about trying to resolve the case. And usually when you are there, it's because there was an impasse. And usually what that means is that the person bringing the claim would say that the insurance company, who's usually on the other end, is just not offering enough money. Or they could be saying that your person contributed to this crash, and you're saying, no, they didn't. And there's a dispute. Maybe it's a he said, she said situation where they don't want to offer any, insurance company doesn't want to offer any money. And they need to put it in front of a jury. We actually have a case like that in our office where it's a he said, she said, two people at an intersection, and we're trying to figure out what happened. And a jury in that situation would hear the facts, hear the evidence, hear the witness testimony, maybe look at pictures, and make a decision as to how that crash happened. In a case where really the value of the injury is at issue, a jury will help figure out what the value of that injury is. It could be in a case, in many of these cases, they'll come in, they'll say, we admit our person was wrong to rear end that car in front of them. That was wrong. that was negligent. We agree that was negligent, but we don't agree that this crash caused these injuries, that this crash, caused them to have limited life activities. We don't agree with that. And then the jury sits down and tries to figure out if those things are related to that crash and whether the defense story sticks and whether the plaintiff's case has merit. So if you're called to jury duty and it's a civil case, maybe a personal injury case, then that's probably why you were there. And most cases that are filed in court are legitimate cases, and you'll probably figure out pretty quick if it's not one of those legitimate cases. But the access to justice is reserved for everyone, whether the case is really small or whether it's a big multi-million-dollar case. Everyone has the opportunity and a right to bring their case in front of a jury of their peers, which is you if you're lucky enough to be called as a juror in that case. And so every case, in my opinion, should be treated the same, whether it's just a small, maybe dog bite kind of case, or whether it's a contract dispute involving millions of dollars. All parties have the opportunity to bring their cases in front of a jury and let the jury decide those issues, let the jury decide the values of those cases. And in the end, the community is served, and we can arrive at what is a fair, community-based decision in that particular case.